Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. I got a couple things to cover for you. The lead one is what I've named titled the episode after today. Is the ATF, or not the ATF? Pardon me for saying that. The ATF is usually the bad guy, but the FBI isn't far behind them lately. The FBI has released a report, and between 2014 and 2022, regarding cases with civilian stop attacks, they said instead of 4.6%, they corrected the number. What this means is that they were saying that in their first report that there was 4.6% of the time that good guys with guns stopped bad dudes in mass shooting type cases. What they found is that in at least 35.7% of the time, this happened where a good guy stopped the shooter. In 2022, it was at least 41.3% where a good guy with a gun stopped the shooter. And if you exclude gun-free zones, the average is over 63.5%. Now, what does this do? This shoots the left's narrative, or the anti-gun narrative, that a good guy with a gun doesn't mean that we're fixing the problem of mass shootings. Now, I'm of the firm belief there are some places that it doesn't make sense to have more people with guns in certain areas. And I mean, like, if everybody on an airplane had a gun, that's probably a bad plan, because that would mean a lot of holes in an airplane that would cause it to lose pressure and go down. So that's one instance. Number two, having some experience in a school environment for a long time now, and having experienced what happened during a school shooting, the aftermath, and seeing the repercussions of all that and living through all that, I don't believe that having a ton of people in a school with guns, if every teacher armed there, I say this because you've as a parent, I'm sure, if you're a parent or if you've dealt with some teachers in real life, you know that some of them are, well, dumber than a box of rocks. Some of them have great capabilities in the classroom, but are not capable of exercising restraint. They suck under pressure, especially this type of pressure. And that's where I see the problem with having more guns. Should there be guns on campus? Absolutely. I absolutely believe that there should be trained people like air marshals on planes. I still believe there should be a gun on the plane, but there should be some training, and there should be some specialty type of ammunition to mitigate, loss of other human life. You're responsible for where that bullet goes after you squeeze the trigger. And with that, having, like 40 people or 75 people in some schools all firing at once kind of puts a lot of bullets in the air when there's a lot of kids that could get hit, or a lot of other people that could get hit, more specifically when I'm talking about this type of place. That is the only time I think that more guns is probably not the best thing. But having people that are trained and capable, that's a different story. So I'm going to lead with that story, and then I'm going to tell you something about, my last weekend. I went out on a bow hunt, my first bow hunt. And what I realized is New Mexico sucks for how often you get to hunt. Okay? And what I mean by that is you have to draw to hunt usually. You have to draw, you have to put into a lottery system to draw for deer or elk, or even turkey in some cases, and for any other big game species in New Mexico except for black bear and cougars or mountain lions. Now, what does that mean? You don't get to get out into the woods as often as you would hunting big game. Now, for me, I'm not one of those guys that I'm going to have to start getting more into small game, but here's why. I noticed that my basic land navigation skills are not as sharp as they once were. Okay? And what I mean by that is I'm not getting lost in the woods, but I'm not as confident or as capable as I once was. Getting from point A to point B, still do no problem. But when you're hunting deer, I do something called still hunting. So those of you from back east understand what still hunting is. It's actually where you're actually kind of stalking your game, you're following along trails, you're doing that type of thing. In New Mexico, if you get deep, deep down, and I'm sure it's the same in any places that are the Rocky Mountains or even the Appalachians, you get down in some of those canyons, and you lose landmarks because all you see are giant ridges or mountains around you, especially in box canyons. Now, you if you're smart, you use things like the sun, keeping it on a certain shoulder, or keeping it on a certain direction, and hey, that's the direction I need to go back, or based off of that which direction to head back, and that's part of what I did. But the other thing that I noticed is that I was making, basically, I started chasing after deer, specifically a buck. I was trying to get within bow range with with my bow, and following that deer, which is something that I've done before, and my dad has always advocated if you get a chance, so you can get a better shot. And that was my problem. My shot would have been at 60 yards, and I'm using a recurve bow. So I'm using what one of my good friends calls a trad bow. No sights, no nothing like that. I'm just using archery skills. And I wouldn't say I'm very good. I'm pretty good at the distances that you would normally have, I would say, back east. And for a compound bow, I probably could have got my deer this time had I gotten a little bit closer. Okay? But this is in thick brush. That's another thing you have to worry about with bow hunting. You don't have to worry about with rifles so much, especially with the right caliber, as a rifle round will go through brush and strike its target, especially if you know that's the target you're hitting. And I'd already seen this deer, and I wanted to make sure that it was 100% legal. That, and when I first saw it, it was at 120 yards, and I am not good enough with a bow to hit 120 yards. I don't think I would do that even with a compound, because I want to make sure that the arrow strikes where it needs to. So needless to say, I was stalking this animal, and there's a point where I got a little bit turned around, and I did something that my dad always said to do, which is probably the wrong thing to do for archery, is I got to the highest ground possible. And what happened when I got to the highest ground possible is, in New Mexico, there's these weird sandstone formations that are everywhere. Okay? And if you get into a certain place where you can look down, you might not necessarily be able to get down unless you go back the exact same way you got up on the thing. And what I did is I was trying to follow how you can see from these types of places how water comes off of them. Okay, so it took me 3 tries to get off of this place where I was at, because it was so rugged and so dense with vegetation and everything else that it was just impassable. What I learned on this was that hunting with a bow is extremely different than hunting with a rifle. For one thing, you have something that's 5 or 6 foot wide that you're carrying if you're using a recurve or you're using a longbow. And even when you're using a compound bow, you've got something that's 3 or 4 feet wide. And you're usually used to the rifle being in your body frame, okay, when you're hunting, at least with me. So you can be lower, more compact as you're stalking the game, and you can weave in and out of vegetation easier. Well, with a bow, you can't do that. You have to back up, move around, take a different path, because you have wider stuff, plus you have your arrow if it's knocked and you're ready to take your shot. In doing that, what I noticed is that I had gotten off of the path I intended to go. And that led me to lose the exact bearing I had already had. Now, I'm not a stranger to the woods. I've been hunting since I was 7 or 8 years old with my dad. And it's just a reminder that I need to spend more time in that environment because I'm not as sharp as I once was. And so that's the other thing I would like to tell you guys is that if you're going to be out in the woods, be careful. I carry the basics of what I need if I have to make a camp and wait for people to find me. I was hunting in one of the biggest forests in New Mexico, Carson National Forest. There's a lot of roads where I was hunting, so it wasn't if I found a road. If I was lost, which I wasn't, it was more so I lost my bearings for a little bit in this really thick, dense place of basically vegetation. You can't see landmarks when you're in that type of vegetation. You have to penetrate through it. It just took longer to penetrate through that vegetation because of, honestly, my bow. And that was a little frustrating. But once I got out to where I could see where I was going again and I could get my bearings with the sun, and I even had my compass with me, and I'm not going to lie, I broke out my compass when I was in that really thick vegetation because there was a point where I was sure the sun was in one direction, in which it was, but I couldn't see the sun at this time. It was that part of the day where the sun had started to come down below the ridge line in some places, and that's where I was at. So I knew the light source was over there, but I wasn't 100% sure where that was. So if you don't know in the woods, if you're off exactly, 2 degrees, you could end up, 20, or not 20, 2 or 3 miles away from where you want to go. And that's not what happened. What ended up happening is I used my compass there, figured out what I needed to do, adjusted my path, and started going back a different way. I followed a different ridge line after I stopped stalking the deer because I realized there was no way because it kept sticking to really thick vegetation, and that's what leads me to think that this was 100% a buck. It was not, I didn't get to see but just a flash of its antlers, but its behavior, knowing from past behavior, hunting deer, this is what bucks do when they know they're being hunted. Okay? Wouldn't you stay in the places that give you the best cover if you know some dude's gonna try to kill your ass? Anyway, as I was stalking out of this place, or finally gave up on that, started coming out, instantly I run up on a well location where a bulldozer was, and then there was this little road, and I was like, okay, this road isn't the main road because it's not paved. It's not very well maintained. But I'm pretty sure the main road is just a little farther down. Just follow this road and it'll run into the main road. Sure enough, that's what happened. And I walked back to camp, and like I was supposed to. Happy ending. But how many hunters or how many people, hikers, get into places and they don't have those skill sets that they need? They don't have a compass. They don't know how to use a compass. And that's what makes me think about, in addition to the 2A stuff, I want to keep everyone that is in our community, which is the 2A community, which is a lot of hunters, a lot of tactical shooters, that as the hunting season props up, make sure you carry those little things you need to survive if you need to. A fire source, a water source, a good knife, a good rough use knife if you can carry it, if you feel like carrying the weight, a pair of binoculars, a compass, but more importantly, know how to use all those things. Do you have an emergency survival blanket, one of those little thin mylar blankets that helps keep heat in? Because I firmly believe that if you stay put in a single location and you don't try to go off into the world once you feel you're lost, the powers that be, whether it's God or whether it's, the state police in New Mexico, as well as your friends and your family that are going to start looking for you, they have a better chance of finding you if you're not walking around in circles forever and ever, wasting your resources, either your physical resources, your water resources, because you're drinking your water as you're walking around. It makes it harder for them to find you. Okay, and if it was storming, which it has for me before, this is the first first bow hunt I've ever been on, but first hunt I've ever been on where it was warm enough to where I had to shed just my overblouse. I was wearing Marpat fatigues because you can use camouflage, 100% camouflage when you're bow hunting, and that's what's recommended so that you can actually stalk your prey a little more effective. And it was really effective because I've seen more deer than I have ever seen during a hunt with any rifle hunt, that is, with my camouflage. But what was more important to me was thinking about I'm not wearing anything that's reflective or anything if they're having to ever hunt for me. That was one of those thoughts I had while I was trying to twist through this vegetation. So what do I have to do? And, this is where the smart woodsman comes in. People that have been in the woods a long time. You may not have those sharpest skills, and that's what I see with me, is that there was a point in time in my life I spent a good chunk of my life in the woods. And I haven't been able to do that with work and everything else in my life. And if I'm going to continue hunting and continue to enjoy the woods, which I intend to do, I need to get sharper on those skills. And that means spending more time in the woods so you know the areas better. But it also means keeping those skills like using a compass, like knowing direct cardinal points of the compass, and knowing how to use basic landmarks to navigate where you're going. It's different in a city. We all form this like map of how to get places in the city. And plus you also have the holy grail of directions with Google or with Apple Maps. So you can just plug in your destination and go, right? That's great. How do you do that when you can't do that? Okay? We're getting into a point where those type of skills may become very needed if you have to bug out or you have to go away. So I wanted to drop that stuff about the FBI because I thought it was interesting. I hope you had a great Labor Day weekend. Like, share, subscribe, comment, please. Be great.